Chris Goff, welcome back to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
We are going to catch up with you and go into detail on some of the thoughts you've gathered and published for Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers around our 40th anniversary and kind of looking back at some big key moments in RMFW's history, which you were involved with. But first, I just want to give folks an idea. You have recently moved or in the process of making your home base in Michigan.
Right. During COVID, my daughter had a baby and she really needed some help with daycare. Putting a brand new baby into daycare, and she had to go back to teaching. So I said, well, I would help. And so we bought a home because it was cheaper than renting. And as things will out, I'm still helping with daycare. And so we're pretty much making this home base right now. We still have a place in Denver, and then we go back and forth. But right now, pretty much full time, I'm living here.
What part of Michigan?
Grand Rapids.
Gotcha. So you're getting winter there too, obviously.
Yeah. But it's not been that bad. And Michigan's my husband was born and raised here, so we have a lot of family here. We have a lot of cousins and nephews and my sister-in-law, and there's just a lot of family here, and there's a lot of water activities in the summer, like the tubing on the rivers and the beach. The lake has beaches all over, and so it's nice. Pretty pleasant. Winter's colder here than it is in Colorado, though. So
yeah.
As shoveling ice just a few minutes ago, I can attest.
Yep. Well, we wanted to touch base and just sort of go back through some of the key moments in RMFW's kind of evolution and then transformation, because lots of things have happened to the organization since, I think your time period starts in the late 1980s or?
88.
Okay, 88, yeah.
And that was the first year that, that's when I joined. I started driving down we were still living in Summit County when I started driving down. And then I joined when we moved back to Evergreen in the fall of 88. So much has changed. It's so hard to even, in some ways, is it even hard for you to remember what it was like back then? And the state of the industry was completely different. Right. And that's, that was a big factor. The industry was different, and we were doing things with RMWA when I first joined. It was an affiliate of RMWA, and
the romance writers.
Yeah.
Right.
And so as an RWA affiliate, most of the published authors, most of the people involved were romance writers. Although there were a few of us that were starting to work in mystery or moving further afield. And so that's why it quickly became a subject of, we wanted to disaffiliate so that we could expand and do more with all kinds of commercial fiction and grow our membership. But it came with some growing pains. There were several RWA people who were not at all happy with that. They were not thrilled that we were disaffiliating at all. They did not want us to do that. And so they went their own way. Some of them actually went quite unhappily. I think feeling a little betrayed. And it was difficult for some of them, and I didn't know some of those people very well, so it didn't impact me very much, that part of it. But I know that it was very hard on some of our longtime romance people, because it was a rift that it created some ill will for a while.
And the goal of disassociating was what?
Well, when we were having conferences and things as RWA affiliate, the editors and agents and people being brought in were very romance oriented.
Right.
And people wanted to see that change. They wanted to see, and we did not bring in really editors and agents. Actually, at that time, we were, other than like if there was a local person or something, but mostly it was our published authors, and all of our published authors then were romance. And we wanted to broaden that. And as soon as we disaffiliated, we did expand. I mean, we got a lot of members like Emmy Morris and John Stiff and people like that coming in and participating as active members in sci-fi and mystery, and it changed the critiques, it changed everything, which was a shock to the people who were very happy with their RWA, niche, and I think it was difficult. As a mystery writer, I was delighted because it gave me access to some people that could really give me some insights. Not that romance writers can't give you insights in your work. They can. I mean, they can give you insights in mystery. It's just the tropes and certain things they don't know as well. So,
Right. In the end, and the way it became, it seems like it, at least for me, I love the fact that when I would go to conference or something, you're sitting side by side in some of these big, workshops or classes, and you're right alongside romance and sci-fi and young adult and all these different folks, and you're basically doing the same thing. Obviously within each genre, there are certain things you need to follow, but it's great to just rub elbows, and obviously all the issues around marketing and the questions about publishing and finding an agent. There's so many things that we also all have in common.
Well, we all have in common, but yet at the same time, it's a little different. I think the romance world at that time was very insular, and I mean, there were certain publishers that published romance, and there were quite a few. I don't know, the word escapes me, but there are a lot of tropes, and there's like a template sort of that you follow. It's a and that's not quite the same with the mystery. At that time, the only people that really were publishing mystery were the big six. They were the big six at the time.
Right.
More than that at the time. But they didn't have small presses, didn't exist. The only thing close to a small press that exists were vanity presses, which were all where the authors participated in the cost, a bit like indie publishing. And only it wasn't as great a model as indie publishing is, because vanity press would publish and you contributed money, but they took a big cut of whatever you made. And so it was a different model altogether, and it was not favorable to the author.
Right. And there was a little bit of a stigma then about going vanity press route.
Big stigma.
Yep. So one of the things
nobody did it. And it wasn't something that anybody aspired to do. I mean, everybody wanted to get that commercial publisher. I mean, the big publisher, that's what everyone's goal was. And it was a limited, I mean, it was limited where you could go. So trying to find agents, trying to find editors, trying to find publishers that would look at your work. Most of them were more open to over the transom submittals at that time with the, they used to have parties where they'd read all the submissions, and toss them and burn them, or I don't know, eat pizza, and, but it was not, you could submit directly, and in most cases it wasn't closed off to you. And now, of course, you can't even submit practically without an agent. And you can't get an agent if you don't have any credit or any, I mean, it's really hard to get an agent. I mean, it's the industry is just totally changed. So the needs of aspiring writers has changed. And that's
right.
what we were finding back then, even. You know, the romance people had no way to help with, you know, where you went if you needed a mystery publisher or you wanted to try and publish sci-fi. They had no suggestions for the avenues to go with some of that. So, you know, some of the things like writing a query or whatever are pretty much the same, but the markets were different. The markets were, and I think it was good because we had people who were interested in helping. So the person who did markets for a long time was Margaret Porter I think it was Margaret Porter did the market report for a long time. And she would dig up markets everywhere that were looking for women's fiction or looking for mystery or looking for sci-fi or looking and would post it in the Rocky Mountain Writer, you know, that the market, you know, this was looking for that market. So it was good. It was helpful. Everyone pitched in and tried to make it work.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about the evolution of the published authors liaison and how that sort of came about. And then
well, the published authors made up a good percentage of the group when it first started. It seemed that there were you know, it was 25% at one point, but it was more than that. I mean, I would say it was 50% or more were published. And then as more and more aspiring authors came in, it settled down to about 25%, 20% published to unpublished. And the published authors they got together and did their published author thing. They were very generous with their time and everything with everyone in the group, but they wanted a chance to talk business with people who were in the business and who, you know, from a different standpoint, which I understand. And so they would get together, they would have luncheons, and then they had their blue mailer, which went out once a month that went to 350 bookstores and like distributors and people to tell them about the books coming out. And it was free at that time for the published authors, part of their membership perk. And then we put together a directory. I think the first one was in 92 maybe, and it was a small directory, and we used it as a membership pamphlet for RMFW, where we had all the information about critiques and everything else, but listed all our published authors, because at that time we really felt those published authors were a draw. At conference, they were always any published author that attended conference, they didn't get a break at conference. They had to pay for conference, but they got a panel if they were attending conference. And we made panels and made sure all the published authors that attended had an opportunity to speak and promote themselves in their work. And so they felt valued. I think there was a value to that. And then about sometime as we got through into like 98, 99, by the time I was published and actually at one point served as PAL chair in there, the aspiring authors felt that they were the majority, and why should their money be spent on the blue mailer, for instance. So then all of a sudden the published authors had to start paying to be included in the blue mailer. And the blue mailer was a big tool for keeping RMFW an important organization in the eyes of the booksellers and the distributors. So I think there was some short-sightedness there, as my belief. I think that it was short-sighted. That our published authors is what makes RMFW such a great organization for those that are trying to break into the market, because they have access to these people, because they really want to help and they really want to give of their time. They were the ones running the board. They were the ones running the committees. They were the only ones judging contests.
Right.
And several of them fell off about that time, and they didn't attend anymore, and eventually dropped their memberships, and they didn't feel that they were valued, and that it wasn't worth it anymore. So that was another point of, where we hit bumps in the road.
Yeah.
Bumps
And
came when we went with iPal and indie publishing. I mean, it was tough. There were times throughout the whole thing when our conference started expanding like crazy, and we had, some really well-known authors, and then agents and editors coming in. And I think the first year when Carol Rusley and I ran a conference, and the next year I ran it by myself, and that was 91. I think we started the editor workshops where you could read your 10 pages to the editor or agent and get the direct feedback. And we did a lot of those kinds of things, and so, but you saw a change in the panels that were being presented then, because all of a sudden you couldn't fit as many of the published authors that were attending on panels, and so the whole thing changes, and it got crazy. And that was a bad time anyway, because that was right when Pikes Peak was starting up, and and we had a board member who was instrumental in starting Pikes Peak, and we had conference people, and I was president at that time, who did not want the list of editors and agents we were going to approach shown to that board member, because they were afraid that Pikes Peak would jump on it, and they were coming 6 months ahead of us with invitations. And I was accusing that board member of being unethical, although I wasn't. I was simply stating that there was an issue, and how do we resolve it. And it got out of hand, and it got pretty ugly for a while, and then everything smoothed over eventually. I mean, it all does, it all works out. But all those road bumps were, I don't think people understand that all those things were crossed those things were crossed, and now more things come, and then more things come, and you begin to go, if you came up when I did, and you're thinking commercial publishing is the way that you're supposed to go, when all of a sudden we're giving pen awards to people who are self-publishing, you take a deep breath and go, oh, well, what does the pen mean then? What does it really mean? If I could have self-published way back when and got my pen right away, I mean, would it have meant anything? So, but the industries are changing, and so we have to be more open-minded about it, and take a look at what, I don't know what the criteria is now to be self-published, but when we first allowed it, it was almost impossible to be self-published, because we required so many copies to be sold, or so many.
Right. Yeah, it was a pretty big number, or either number of dollars or number of copies. It was a pretty high standard.
It was really high at one point.
Yeah. I remember, I don't know if you'll remember this, but I think we had a conversation at one conference, you and I might have been president or something, and this is, I don't know how many years ago, but we were chatting, and you pointed out that the conference schedule really leaned toward just starting out rookie writers, and there weren't enough strands, there wasn't enough classes and sort of enough to draw in veteran writers who might still want to work on some aspect of the business, whether it's a craft issue, writing issue. But there are different levels, and I know for a fact, I've learned so much through RMFW, and if I were to look back at my writing awareness and what I knew about what goes into writing a book or publishing a book when I first came around versus now. It's come a long way, but it
Mhm.
is hard. It is, yeah, I think you're right that the conference did skew towards beginning writers for a while there. And I think in some ways it still kind of does. I think
Yeah,
there were 70 or 80 brand new writers. Not last year, I wasn't there, but the year before. There were like a quarter of the attendees were brand new writers.
right. And it's so basic. I mean, it's hard to go to any conference and go to a workshop and most of the times I come away with at least one nugget that I hadn't thought of, something that I hadn't thought of. But there are different levels of conferences, and when you go to some where you get presenters that are definitely above me on the food chain, they have advice and they have things they're offering based on what they've learned that offers me something where I sit up all of a sudden, I'm paying attention and going, oh, I hadn't thought of that before, or I hadn't considered that, or I hadn't, or they have a technique that I haven't tried that before. I mean, I haven't worked
Yeah.
that to spark creativity or whatever it is. And too many times you go and you're sitting through panels that, I mean, you could teach. You're coming away with nothing. And I've had that happen. It happens at RMF. It happened at RMFW too many times for me there in one stretch where it was so basic. Everything was so basic, and then people pay attention when you say, and that's the thing that's good. I say something to you and you say something to the board, and the next year they try and put in more expert panels, or what they would call expert panels, or have the law enforcement person come and talk, because you can get something. And you can't control the whole thing, because you get people who want to go to that law enforcement panel who know nothing, and they're asking questions that are like, oh, please,
Yeah.
we're beyond this. We want to talk about, and yeah, I can see why they're excited at the idea. It's just they haven't quite learned what they need to learn to get there, to go there. I did go to a conference one time, and it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if it's something we could implement, but those are the things. That's the reason that ideas and talking and knowing is good, is that they didn't allow you to go to advanced workshops until you'd already been through at least one time at the conference going to the basic workshops. And then the second year that you attended, they would allow you to go to the other ones. But up until then, they didn't allow it. You had to go to the basic workshops for your first year. It was interesting. I mean, I don't know. I think we'd get a lot of rebellion on that.
Yeah.
But it worked. In some ways it worked, because by the time the people had gone through the basics, then they came the next time and they went to some of the more intense. They didn't ask the real basic, what font, what size type, what paper, just the kinds of questions that you're like,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. How long should a query letter be?
Yeah.
Stuff that's pretty readily available out there. It is tricky, because you can get a really, really good writer, a supremely good writer who's never been published. And you pick up their pages, and somebody who just has a knack for telling a story, and they've never engaged with the publishing side of things. And then you can have somebody who has a dozen books out there, and the writing is I'm going to be frank, it just isn't up to snuff. And they could be through a traditional publisher too.
Oh yeah.
And so there's just so many different combinations. It's not like I don't know, my favorite sport, baseball, where you work your way up to the major leagues, and there's just a clear ability to show and demonstrate that you can do all the things it takes to be a professional baseball player. And that's quite a long list of skills you need to have. And you demonstrate that over time. But now, especially now, the industry is just wide open. Anybody can indie publish, self-publish a book, and they can have a couple dozen titles quickly out there in the world, and from all appearances look like an expert because of the sheer volume of things they've put out there. And I'm not
And you get a
casting
few
any
of them that are really good writers, and you get
right.
a few of them that are just literally phoning it in, and they don't have the depth, they don't have the meat, they don't have but they have the volume.
But then they also don't have the readers. They just have the number of titles out there. If you're publishing and doing it that route, and I know a couple people who put out a couple books a year, but they'll get thousands of reviews on Amazon because they've got this huge following that is waiting for their next story.
And you wonder why. Some of them. Some of them I go, interesting.
Yeah.
You know, whereas I know other people struggle to get enough reviews. I mean, it's hard to get reviews sometimes, and they're incredible books, and you're thinking, why aren't people reviewing this? Why aren't people picking this one up?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
it's really hard. It's really hard, and you find yourself kind of going, okay, so how do you help? You know, I mean, that's the thing. I've been to, you know, you go to workshops and you listen to people who have hit it out of the ballpark with their very first book, and they got really lucky, some of them. And they know they got lucky, and they don't know why they succeeded and why somebody else didn't. You know, they don't have a clue, and they're not helpful. They're not good teachers often because they can't articulate what it is that they did or learned or how they applied what they, you know.
Yeah.
And it's hard because some of the best authors are terrible teachers. And, you know, some of the best authors are really good teachers. I mean, some of them are really good, and they're good authors too. And you know, you can, I don't know. I remember one time at Thriller Fest sitting next to Lee Child, and we were listening to this woman saying the 10 rules for writing.
Yeah.
And she said, rule number 1, you know, and Lee elbowed me and he goes, do you do that, Chris? And I said, no. And then the second rule, do you do that, Chris? No. And the third one, he went, let's go to the bar. So we escaped out the back. But, you know, she had she had 10 rules. And I don't believe that that's the way you do it either. I mean, I don't think somebody can lay it out like that. I think it's like you were saying, some people have a natural talent.
Yeah.
People can learn to write, but they'll never be great storytellers. And then there are some people who are wonderful storytellers right out the box and need to learn how to write. I mean, John Grisham's a perfect case in point for that one. I mean, there were so many people who complained about his technical ability with that firm, the first book that really, but the storytelling was compelling. You can't go down. I mean,
yeah. Yep.
So
yeah.
I think that we need to, you know, I think we need to find a good way. I mean, I find it difficult when things like they're looking for some people, they were looking to elevate the speakers one year. And I said, well, I think I could get Margaret Cole to come and speak. She's a friend of mine, you know. And I was told, well, have her fill out a proposal and submit it. And I said, no, I will not ask Margaret Cole to fill out a proposal. You can forget it. And walked away. I mean, I'm not, I think that that's again, short-sighted on the part of people who are planning our conferences or who are, and I don't know if it's because they have a different perspective on what's important. At that time, most of them were self-published that were putting conference together that year, I think. So they don't maybe have the same concept of who a Margaret Cole is to a lot of us.
Right. Yeah. If some big name person from around the country, if we said we can get that person here to speak, JK, if we get JK Rowling, are we going to put JK Rowling into the proposal process? And
Fill out a proposal form. No, you're not going to.
Margaret Cole, and she might be a little bit of a regional writer, but she's got a national audience. And you're exactly right. I think just there should be some allowance for bringing in somebody just based on their track record alone, because so many writers young up and coming writers would appreciate being around a classy, smart woman like her. Yeah, and
Well, and I mean, she was hitting the Times list, and she was doing incredibly well with the Wind River series. It was not like she was a nobody. And,
right. Yep.
A CJ Box, I mean, who's a local guy too, really. I mean, he got his start at RMFW.
He was a writer of the year. He was a writer of the year one year.
But I remember the year he read in editor critique workshops and sold that book. I mean, it's like there were some people who just rocked it, and the way that the stories they would have about how it worked could be really fascinating to people. I mean, it's different. It's a different world now. It's a different publishing world. I mean, I sold my series on a 30 pages, a 4-page synopsis and 30 pages, and had a 3-book series contract, and I'd never published a book.
Right.
And that was with Berkeley. I mean, that was not with us. I mean, that was with one of the big publishers. But that didn't happen now. I mean, it's pretty rare that you can squeeze that out. Now, I don't know anybody who's done it recently. I mean, at the time that I did it, there were other people who were getting contracts like that. I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
But I think that that's an editor who sees something and is willing to invest in an author, and that doesn't happen in today's publishing world. They want that book to come in so polished that they don't have to do that much with it, really. I mean,
how much do you credit RMFW for helping with your books writing?
A lot. I would not have been prepared to I had to learn how to be a writer. I had to learn the craft. I had to learn some things. I was a journalist by trade. But it was hard to learn how to translate that to fiction. I think that I actually got my agent by going to an immersive retreat writing thing where I went for 2 weeks, and that's all you did was write and work with these agents and editors and stuff. And I was asked if I could be, if Peter, my agent, could represent me. And that was like, and I think without that step, I don't know where I would have been. I finally was like, it's make or break here. It's time to make or break, but critique, the critique groups and things were invaluable. I mean, I learned so much from critique and from entering contests and you learn a lot about the business, the way the business works, just by dealing with things like that. When we had the year that the first first year that I took second place in the contest, the first place person had not finished the book and had only written the proposal. And because wasn't required that you had the book at the time. I don't know if it is now, but
I don't think
at
so.
one point we changed it and asked that they have a full manuscript. But but I asked that agent who judged contests why she chose that over mine, and she goes, "Oh my God, you're scared me to death." She said, I just can't read that kind of fiction, and hers is exactly what I like, which was a very traditional cozy thing, and mine was a really dark kind of thriller, scary serial killer thing, and it was like, so it was a wake-up call in the sense that at that point it had nothing to do with my writing skill. It had to do with the fact that the agent didn't like that kind of work.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
So, I mean, and at least I asked her.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known if I hadn't asked her, but I happened to know her. So I said, what is the deal with that? And she told me, she said, "You're scared the heck out of me. I couldn't read it. I don't like to read that stuff." So it's like, well, if it scared you, it did its job, right? So but it shapes how people judge contests then too, in my opinion. It's sort of like our competitions. Now we get such this huge diversity in what people submit, and it's like, you can't judge it based on what you like. You might not like historical fiction, but if you're reading a historical mystery, you've got to decide if it's a better historical mystery than this cozy mystery, when you like cozy but you don't like historical. I mean, you have to decide if it's a better historical and fair, and it's hard to do that. But I think that helped me as a writer a lot, learning to just going through the paces of doing all those things and working all those volunteer hats through RMFW is what gave me those skills to critique and to judge and to judge contests and to and I learned how to speak in front of crowds. I learned how to, do all kinds of things being part of RMFW.
Yeah. And that's the bottom line. If you have a sort of a voice, if you want to have a voice, if you have a preference about what kind of conference you'd like to see, if you have a preference about what kind of workshops you want to see, if you want to have a voice in where RMFW is going down the road, volunteer, get involved, help out a conference, help out, volunteer for the board, see if you can, help out at that level. Do what you can, participate in that conversation. And I know you were very involved.
Well, I served as, I worked on contests. I was never in charge. I was in charge of mystery, I think a section of it one year, but not the overall thing ever. But I was the newsletter editor, I was secretary, I was treasurer, I was president, I was PAL chair, I was critique chair, and I served for 12 years solid. I think I served in some capacity on the board. And I think that it's really nice that people are taking the time to find out who shaped and who helped bring RMFW up, because it's so quickly you're forgotten, and it's amazing how quickly you're forgotten in the shuffle of things. If you miss a year or two, or you're not, people look at you and they have no clue who you are. And you feel like, oh man, I'm really kind of out of the loop here. But it's time for other people to step up. There's a point where writers need to learn to step aside too. I mean, I think that there are some who, maybe could have learned to step aside a little bit quicker. Maybe should have, but didn't. And that's, it's and then come back. People come back, you come and go, but
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, Chris, will you make plans to come to Colorado Gold, or you being 1,000 miles away or so, is that going to be a hurdle? Do you know yet?
no, I don't know if I'll make it this year.
Yeah.
I would like to. We just solidified some travel plans that we have. And so I think that I will be back in the country. We're going on a cruise up through from London up through Scotland and the Shetland Islands and up to the top of Norway, and and then
Nice.
to Sweden to visit relatives. So I wasn't sure when I would be back.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
I will be back in time to regroup before it happens. So I would love to, I do love it. It's because it's the one place I can sometimes see old friends that I, see once a year maybe. And I miss it if I don't come. I actually do miss it. I miss not seeing people and not sitting in the bar or going. And I actually love to go to workshops and listen to what people have to say or I really enjoy it. So I go. I would love to. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful.
Very good. Yeah.
Hopeful.
Well, Chris, thanks for all you did do for RMFW and helping shape it over the years. And thanks for jumping on the podcast and kind of reflecting a little bit with us about all that's transpired over the years and getting RMFW to be what it is today.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity. I think the podcast is one of the great things that's come out. Actually, that's all you're doing. And I think that that's something that's been very good for RMFW to have that record of talks with people about their thoughts about RMFW or their, books or marketing or whatever it is, that the podcast subject is. It's a great tool, and it's a way you give back. And you give back a lot. And that's the one thing I do want to say is that there are a lot of authors that were instrumental in the beginning who have given back and continue to give back year after year after year. And a lot of them do it behind the scenes. They're not really the out front people that you see all the time. But they're there and they're contributing. And I think that speaks highly for the organization because we all love it. We all love it. So.
Yep, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you again so much. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the kind words about the podcast. But I am honored to be able to chat with folks like you. And I love hearing what's going on in all your writing worlds. And it's a pleasure. So.
Well, it's great. Well, thank you for having me.